Hello and welcome once again. You're here in the Division of Education, Innovation and Energy's e-learning program. We are looking at CAPE Communication Studies, and I'm your facilitator, Kimmery Richardson Thomas. The second slice of our pie is to inform. Where the writer's purpose is to inform, the aim is to explain a function, to describe a process, to present facts or ideas, or simply to present information because it's informative. Informative writing, or when you're writing to inform, is also referred to as expository writing. Where the writer's purpose is to inform, you're going to find that types of writing you're going to find there. The expository type and informative type, your academic textbooks. And I'd say all of your textbooks, with the exception of many of the literature texts. Your literature texts, such as your plays and stories and poems, would not fall under expository writing. But those texts that are supplementary for your literature, that would explain how it is the writer would have gone about doing certain things, that would give you additional information about this play, or about the poems, or about the story, they would be examples of expository writing. Your biology textbooks, your accounts textbooks, your PE textbooks, these are all academic texts. Statistical reports are examples of expository writing, where you're going to get a breakdown of data, what it is the findings are saying, what percentage of the population may be without devices at this time during the COVID-19 lockdowns. What percentage of our population are best able to be engaged in online learning? What percentage of the population are finding it difficult with the economic situation? Statistical reports are examples of expository writing. They are there to inform the reader. Incident reports. Something happened, you are a witness, you're asked to give a report. An accident, a fight, a fire, a burglary. You saw what happened and you're given a report of that incident. You're not required to do anything other than state the facts. And that is a very crucial element when we go and look at some of the organizational strategies and language techniques of expository writing, and when you write to inform. Biographies. Biographies are this would present information about someone, and very often we know about celebrities, athletes, famous persons would write, well, they will not write it. There would be a biography that's written by someone else about them, but when they write it themselves, that's your autobiography. And this is done to give us information about the person's life. It is usually or primarily factual. And it's just to be able to help us to know who this person is or was, depending on if they're still alive or not. News stories. We expect that when we tune in to news, whether it's television, radio, if we take the newspapers, we go online, we expect that what we're getting from that news story is going to be informative. The aim is to give us some information about what took place throughout the course of the day, or around the world in our region, and how we can get information about that. So these are some examples of informative writing. Organizational strategies that you can find in information texts will include, but not limited to, these. Sequence. When you're looking at informative text, you're going to see language that speaks of a sequence. First of all, secondly, next, in addition, in conclusion. You want to be able to see words that are telling you that you're moving from one point to the next. It's similar to process, with the distinction being sequence may have to do with time. Sequence usually involves time, but the process involves the activity and the steps involved in doing it. But they both involve moving from one point to the next. Are you seeing examples of any of them in the piece of writing? It would usually guide you to come to the conclusion that this may be an informative text. You're going to find examples of these in particular in your history books. Social studies, you're going to see sequence of events, the sequence of events, and I'll use the coronavirus again, when we look at the sequence of events, we usually hear of it being first detected in Wuhan, China, sometime around November last year. And then you have how this moved throughout Asia and got to Europe before it got to us. And it's a sequence of events. What is the process? We see process when we look at recipes. We see process when we are presented with information telling us how to set something up, how to develop. When you're doing your chemistry or biology experiments, there's a process involved. Cause and effect. And we saw cause and effect when we looked at persuasive writing, but it's also an element in our informative writing. But you have to look at what is the information being presented. If you see cause and effect along with sequence, processes, and so on, chances are that the cause and effect there would be more related to informative text than it might be for persuasion. But you have to analyze all of the information that's in the piece to help you to determine what kind of writing it is. Compare and contrast, again, is also a feature we find in persuasive writing, and it can also be part of our informative text. Classification, when you look at biology in particular, you may have classification of living things, and you would see how this information is structured. Problem and solution is also part of your informative writing. There is a problem, and how do you get a solution, particularly in our mathematics textbooks. So these are some of the organizational strategies that you can expect to find that would guide you to determine if this piece of writing is informative. The language techniques that you can look out for in informative text would include historical data, as I indicated before, social studies, history. Even in terms of literature, you may get some information about a writer and you'll get some historical data. Statistical data of figures, percentages, ratios, all of these are very important. Factual data from websites, and the distinction must be made. It's not data from websites, but specifically factual data from websites, because we all know all the information on websites are not always accurate, not always factual. And we can refer to drinking bleach for coronavirus. It's not all factual. Sequence transition words. Again, when I said go and do some research on transition words, for informative text, there are transition words that tell you that this is a sequence you're looking at, how the information is being laid out, and a sequence of events. If you're seeing words, transition words that speak about a sequence, first of all, in the beginning, secondly, thirdly, consequently, in the first place, these are words that tell you, these are transition words specifically that tell you there's a sequence of events. Information from credible sources. One of the keys that would help you, and we're going to look at it a little later on, when you get your Module 1 question in your Paper 2 exam for communication studies, at the bottom of that passage, and it's not just in communication studies, you see it as well for summary writing at the CSEC level. At the bottom of that passage, that extract, you're going to have something, a line that indicates where this information came from. And the information, the purpose for putting it there is to help you as a reader to know that the information may or may not have come from a credible source. And then we have the use of academic jargon. That's language specific to the particular subject that you're paying attention to. There would be language that's specific to physics that you're not going to use in Spanish. Language that will be specific for technical drawing that you're not going to use in food and nutrition. What would be the academic jargon related to law or medicine? You're looking out for that type of language because those are vocabulary cues that help you to understand you're looking at an informative text. The third and final slice of the pie that we're looking at here is writing to entertain. It's my favorite kind. The aim is usually to present details incorporating the 5 senses. These are details that should appeal to the sense of smell, taste, touch, hearing, and seeing. It aims to also express language creatively and to evoke emotions with imagery, as well as to tell a story. When you're writing to entertain, some examples of that type of writing would include, not limited to, short stories, a novel or a novella. And a novella is a shorter novel, but it may not be as short as a short story. We have poetry and spoken word. And you know that even though some students may not particularly enjoy poetry, we can appreciate a well-written and a well-delivered spoken word slam poetry because it's for entertainment purposes, bearing in mind that some of them are also there with elements of persuasion. But the key purpose would be to entertain us while persuading us about a particular point of view. We have fables and folklore and myths. These are stories about our folklore in the Caribbean. We have myths about Roman. We talk about things like Thor, and if you are into the Avengers, these are all myths and so on that have really generated into something a lot bigger, but the purpose is to entertain. You have plays and skits and dramatic pieces that we put on stage. You get videos of it, yes, but it's done on a stage. You can go to, even at your school level, students may do a skit, and you sit there and you're entertained. Realistic fiction. Realistic fiction in particular is what we may get from our movies, but always remember that whatever you're looking at as a movie would have begun as a script. There has to be a script writer who would have written this realistic fiction. So you're watching a movie and it's based on something that's real. You're looking at a movie on one of the American presidents, Lincoln. It's real in terms of the information is about something that really happened. But they're creating that one is actually factual. But the realistic fiction rather may be about someone that didn't exist, something that's made up, but they're using real human beings. They're using a real situation and a real setting. You have your journal, your diary, your blogs. When you're writing these things, you're writing and it still has an entertainment value because of what it does for you while you're writing it, how it helps you to feel while you're writing it. Biographies and autobiographies can also have entertainment benefits depending on the language and the approach used by the writer. There are essays that are entertaining, especially if we are talking about some of our narrative essays. And we have songs that are also very entertaining. We have, and right now on one of our local stations, we have the Extempo Challenge, the Global Extempo Challenge, and people are singing these songs. People are creating these songs, and many of them are quite entertaining. Again, when we want to look at the organizational strategies of entertainment text, how are you structuring the information for entertainment purposes? I want you to always remember that table setting. How is it laid out? How is it structured? What is being placed where? There's always a strategy involved in where you put the information. Chronological order. Are you seeing in this text information that's laid out in terms of what came first, what came after, what came next, and what was the last thing? Is there, and usually what you're going to find with this in entertainment text would be, in the beginning, there was a little boy who, later on in his life, and you're going to see something that builds with your story, so you have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Evidence of conflict, action, problem, and resolution. Now, this is very much related to evidence of conflicts, etc. It's related to when you're writing stories. But again, all entertainment texts are not stories. But you will find if you're reading something and you're seeing samples of this, you're seeing an example of a problem, and you're seeing action words and verbs, a lot of action verbs, and then there's a problem and they get to a solution. Hey, That's a story. Did they include characters? And characters who are speaking with each other, so you're getting dialogue. It's a story. And we have songs that tell stories that would include characters. And is there a narrative point of view? Is it in the first person, speaking of the I? Is it being told in the third person point of view? Those are just some examples of point of view that you can find in your entertainment text. The language techniques that would help you to understand if this is an entertainment text: figurative language. This is not an example that would have been used in any of the other two slices of our pie. You may find examples of figurative language if you're going to use persuasion, if you want to talk about alliteration, you want to use similes and metaphors, yes. But I want to draw to your attention that we're not looking at a lot of figurative language in our informative text. Informative texts are very factual, but when you're writing to entertain, you really want to make full advantage of your figurative language, your metaphors, your similes, personification, assonance. Are you getting hyperbole? These are things that you want to see coming out of your entertainment text. Imagery. You're getting a clear picture of nature, clear picture and vocabulary that would help you to understand the blazing fire, the deep reds of this inferno. You're getting color, you're getting sound, you're getting texture being described. This is what would happen when you're getting use of imagery for your entertainment text. Sense data. Is the information appealing to any or all of your five senses? And this is what you look for. Are you reading this and you can see what the writer is trying to create? Are you able to hear the sounds that are being described? Can you smell the rich aroma of that Saturday soup in your mother's kitchen that you've been longing for all week because of the vocabulary used by the writer? This is what sense data involves. Are you seeing action words? Action words that will give you movement. And it's not always that it has to be fast-paced movement, but movement nonetheless. Because you can have an action word that speaks of the slow pace of bureaucracy, but it's an action of the movement and how slow it is. Adjectives that would be describing, and transition words again. And I want you to remember, bear in mind how many times we've seen transition words. In all of the years that I've marked Cape Communication Studies, there's always going to be, I've always seen marks allocated for transition words. For that matter, this is an area that is always going to be assigned marks for SEA, CSEC English A, as well as your Cape Communication Studies. At that level, they're assessing language. How well are you able to use your transition words, and how well are you able to identify when they're being used by other writers? As we move along, let's take a look at a little bit of practice. We want to go through this. I want you to pay attention to, we have a few examples of writing, different genres of writing. And we're going to use the letters P, I, and E to determine what kind of writing each of these may fall under. So if we look at poetry, what type of, what is the writer's purpose when they write poetry? And when we go back, and I'm not asking you to go back and check now, I want you to think. Is the writer trying to persuade you? Is it to inform or to entertain? Most times poetry would fall under the entertainment spectrum of writer's purpose, but again, you need to pay attention to other things that may be in there, because some poets try to persuade. Historical writing. Look at what may be there. You're going to find sequence of events. You're going to get data that's referring to times in history. What is the purpose of historical writing? We can conclude that historical writing is usually to inform. A eulogy. When someone passes away and we go to their funeral, someone presents a eulogy letting us know about this person's life. Most eulogies are there to inform. However, I have heard a few that were quite entertaining, even in the midst of death. And what some writers aim to do is to balance their eulogy with some information, with elements of entertainment, to sort of lighten the harshness and the grief of the moment. Debates. When you listen to a debate, you have two sides and they're arguing a point of view. Our debates are usually to persuade. Songs are like our poems. And usually the purpose of a song, again, is to entertain their listeners. The majority of people who write songs, they want to entertain you because songs are written to be performed for an audience, to entertain the audience. Research, when you go and you conduct research, you're going to get what? Information. So that our research, when you're doing information, it's always to inform. Advertisements should be quite easy. We spoke about it before. When you look at an advertisement, the purpose of the advertisement is usually to do what? Inform. No, it's to persuade. The purpose of the advertisement is to convince you to buy something or to be involved in something or to believe what you're being told. So the advertisement, the purpose of your advertisement is to persuade. And last but not least, when you go to look at a play, and remember, you're going to go and look at, you've made a decision to go to look at it because you appreciate the entertainment value that a play can provide. So these are just some examples. And I want you to bear in mind that a writer, whenever they write, they always have a purpose. Always. And even though we spoke about those three, persuade, inform, and entertain, it's still a little wider than that, but most of the writing can fall under one of those three categories, and you could elaborate. You can explain a bit more. And I want to encourage you to spend a little time exploring writer's purpose, but be clear in how you can identify these strategies when you're looking at your Module 1, Paper 2 question. As we move along, that Module 1, Paper 2 question also would from time to time ask you to identify the writer's tone. In our previous session, we spoke about writer's tone, and we're going to go over it again for the purposes of where we are today. Because we're looking at that Module 1, Paper 2 question that you get at the beginning, sometimes when you're asked to identify the reader's tone, you need to be clear about how it is the writer feels. How can you identify the writer's attitude in that piece? So tone is the expression of the author's or the speaker's attitude towards the subject or towards the audience. More specifically, tone is the method or technique by which the author creates attitude. Diction, imagery, figurative language, and syntax are used by the author to reveal attitude of the author or the speaker. The tone of the article, the essay, story, poem, novel, screenplay, or any other written work can be described many ways. The author's tone can be witty, it can be dreary, it can be warm, playful, outraged, neutral, polished, wistful, reserved, and on and on and on. And the tone will vary depending. Basically, if there is an attitude out there, an author can write about it. So, there are ways in which you can figure out the author's tone. And we're going to look at three tricks. Three tricks to figure out the writer's tone. In order to figure out the writer's tone, you want to start first of all by reading the introductory information. You want to read what is at the very beginning. You want to watch the word choice of the author, and you want to go with your gut. Go with your gut really just basically means how you feel. After you've read this, how you feel. And very often that feeling, for those who are reading with a critical eye, that feeling is usually right in terms of helping you to identify the author's tone. So when we look at the introductory information, this is information that can be found usually at the bottom of the page. And even though we're calling it introductory information, bear in mind that you should read it before you actually go into the body of your passage. This tells you where the information comes from. So after you've read the instructions, it is advisable that you get this introductory information that's at the bottom of the page that will guide you into what it is you're going to read. In this example, this passage is adapted from the chapter Personality Disorders in Introduction to Psychology, edited by Rita L. Atkinson and Richard C. Atkinson, copyright 1981 by Harcourt Brace Jovanovich Incorporated. What is the possible tone? When you look at the name of the book, where the information came from, the name of the chapter, Personality Disorders, and we want to I want to be able to highlight some things for you. The chapter is called Personality Disorders. And then the name of the book is Introduction to Psychology. There is nothing funny about it, so that as you look at it, you realize that this may be a serious type of writing. This may be information that is being presented that is more of an academic nature, so that you can tell that a possible tone, it may be a very serious or academic. And it gives you a guide. Now, if you ignore it, you don't read this information, then you still have to go, you read the entire text and draw your conclusions. But if you read this part, you have an idea, and then you continue reading the rest of the passage, you may find that it supports your original assumption, your original guess, that, hey, maybe this is of a more serious nature and a more serious tone. Let's take a look at a second passage. This one says, this passage is adapted from the novel The Men of Brewster Place by Gloria Naylor, copyright 1998 by Gloria Naylor. What is the possible tone? Now, interestingly, we know it's a novel because it says it's a novel. But it would be difficult to determine the tone of the novel because a novel can have many different tones. When we look back at the Introduction to Psychology, we know this is an academic text. And academic texts usually tend to have a strong academic serious tone. But we don't have the same type of restriction, for want of a better word, when we talk about our novels and writing that is there to tell you a story. The tone can be very dark or depressing. It can be a very playful type of tone, or one of celebration, a tone of success and achievement. You're getting those types of things that may come out, but you're not going to know, and this is an example here, you will not know until you actually read the extract. And there are times that is going to be the case, but you're advised to always pay attention to that information that's placed usually at the bottom of your text before you begin to read your text. So apart from reading the introductory information, you want to also pay attention to word choice. Word choice plays a major part in the tone of a piece. The words that a writer chooses to use would help you to understand how the writer feels. So we're going to look at the following words, see how they reflect a different feeling even though the words are similar in meaning. So let's take a look. Sitting in the sunshine and smile. Sit in the sunshine and smile. Bask in the brilliant rays. Discover your giggle. Our second one says, sit in the hot sun and smirk. Recline in the glaring rays. Hunt for that snicker. And the third one says, sit in the warm sun and grin. Relax in the warm rays. Look for a chuckle. Interestingly, as we look at all three of them, and they ask you to be able to identify the writer's tone, you have to be able to pay attention to the word choice. What are the words used by the writer? In each case, all three examples, they're talking about sitting in the sunshine with a smile of some sort on your face, laying back, letting the rays of the sun, really soothe your body, and then be able to laugh or giggle or smile. All three sentences have the same idea, but all three of them use different words. And in each case, the word choice would generate a different tone. Sit in the sunshine and smile, bask in the brilliant rays, discover your giggle. This first one, it sounds very peaceful and relaxing. Bask, sit in the sun, discover your giggle. It almost sounds like something you can get from an advertisement on a tourist guide magazine, so that you may find it's a little more relaxing here. Sit in the sun and smirk. Now, a smirk is a type of smile, but it's a more playful kind of smile. You recline in the glaring sun, hunt for that snicker. And even the use of the word hunt there, I think of like a treasure hunt and a playfulness. And the last one says, sit in the warm sun and grin. Relax in the warm rays. Look for a chuckle, almost as if you may not be able to find it, but see if you can find a reason to laugh. When we look at all three, we can conclude that the tone varies in each case. There will be a varying tone for each one. So let's take a look. Even though all three sentences are written almost identically, the tones are very different. The first one is more relaxing. You can picture a lazy afternoon, possibly by the pool. The second one is a bit more joyful, playing in the park on a sunny day. The third one is definitely more sarcastic and a bit more negative, even though it is written about sitting in the sun. All three, and we could safely say they're talking about the same thing, but because of the word choice, in all three cases, the tones would vary. When we talk about going with your gut, as I said before, often a tone is tough to describe. But you know what it is. You know what the tone is. You get a particular feeling from the text. Now, last session, we spoke about the fact that you know tone. You know when you're giving somebody an attitude, and you know when you're getting an attitude because of how it's being said. What are the words that the person is using when they're speaking to you, or what words are you using, and what does your voice sound like when you're speaking to someone? So you know tone. When you read a passage, there is that feeling that you should get, if you're reading critically enough, that would tell you, this writer doesn't really like what the situation is about. You might read it and you get a sense that, this writer is trying to encourage us to do X, Y, Z. You're going to get that feeling. And I want to really encourage you, don't lose it. Don't doubt it. When you get that feeling in your gut, there are ways to prove it. And we're going to look at that here. On the author's tone questions in your multiple choice paper, if you get a question on author's tone, hide the answers and try to guess before looking. So you've read the question. So for example, you may have a question that says, the author of the article would most likely describe ballet as, and what you want to do, block off the answers that you're presented with, your options, your A, B, C, D options. And remember what it is you read, and see if you could come up with a logical example, a logical answer. And then you finish that sentence, put an adjective in there based on what it is you read, that the author's feeling about ballet or whatever other topic it is. You put an adjective in there based on what you've read, and then you read the choices that you were given and see if one of those choices may be quite similar to what you guessed. And usually, very often, you may turn out to be quite right. Trust your gut, especially if you know you're a critical reader and you read a lot. Trust your gut when you're getting to those questions as they relate to tone. So let's take a look at this passage. The treadmill began to whir. I gripped its handlebars as the belt started moving me backwards. All I could do now was run, or begrudgingly barrel forward toward an outdated screen that showed me the terrain I was supposed to be running on. It was made of red squares stacked up, one on top of another. The highest stacks were supposed to be steep hills, and the lower ones, valleys. I tried to picture them as burning coals to see if that would make me speed up or at least feel like this exercise was somehow connected to nature, even one of its cruel parts. If we want to explore the writer's tone, and we're looking at word choice, we're looking at trusting your gut, you're looking at the information that's there. You can read the entire thing and be able to figure out, how does this person feel about this treadmill? Even if you're not sure about how they feel, there's some words and phrases that give us an idea. So let's explore some of them here now. The writer says that he gripped the handlebars as the belt started moving me backwards. This bit of detail here almost speaks of lack of progress, moving backwards rather than trying to go forward. And that bit of detail is important here, moving me backwards. Then the writer says, all I could do now was run or begrudgingly barrel forward. Begrudgingly barrel forward is to be doing something or moving forward in a way that you don't want to be going. And he doesn't just say begrudgingly move forward, but barrel forward, as though it's an involuntary action that he didn't want to do but was being forced to do. He also goes on to talk about the screen, and he describes it as an outdated screen. Additionally, he makes a comparison that gives you an idea of how he feels about this exercise. He spoke about the red squares, and he pictured them as burning coals. And burning coals are not pleasant, only if you're going to use them to cook meat, barbecue, and then the eating of it would be pleasant. But the actual burning coals, there's nothing really pleasant about that. Then he ends off by saying that it would make, the burning coals would make me speed up or at least feel like this exercise was somehow connected to nature. At least make me feel like this exercise was somehow, and the use of somehow indicates that he does not feel as if it is. And ends by saying, even one of its cruel parts. The word choices used here by this author, if you look at it, how would you describe the author's attitude towards the treadmill? We can conclude that the author has a very negative view. It's a negative view. It's a negative view that's borne out through the following examples of possible tone. The tone here is sarcastic, this writer is not pleased with this treadmill at all. It's even cynical. We can even say critical. There are other words such as pessimistic or sardonic. These are ways in which we can explain how the writer in that passage feels. If we go back to the passage, again, you're looking at these words: moving backwards, begrudgingly barrel forward, outdated screen, burning coals. Feel like this exercise was somehow connected to nature when it's not, and or even if it's one of the more cruel parts of nature. Everything here tells us this writer is not enjoying the experience on this treadmill. If we look at another passage, again, treadmill. The treadmill began to whirl, and my heart sped up faster than the belt could go. Instead of pressing select on my remote control to escape into a TV show, I had just selected Power Run. A sleek screen with a simple set of red lines showed me the terrain on which I was running. These red lines looked like a pulse, and they got me to run farther and faster than I could ever run when I'm outside, worried about weather, cars, or other people. It may not have looked like I was going anywhere that night, but I had just broken out of a 10-year slump. Again, we talk about writer's tone, and there are certain details that help us to identify how the writer in this extract feels about the treadmill. If we're going to look at how we would describe the writer's attitude, what we can do is look for information within the text. So we can start off by saying that the writer says, instead of pressing select on the remote control, he had just, or she had just selected Power Run. The writer made a choice to select something that may have been a little more intense, and it speaks to a level of confidence, a level of ambition. Similarly, the writer speaks about the screen of this treadmill and says that it's a sleek screen with a simple set of red lines. A sleek screen with a simple set of red lines. And you have an example there of alliteration with the repetition of the same consonant sounds. Not the screen, but sleek, simple set. And you have that, and you get a sense that, hey, this is a really nice treadmill. It's easy to use. I'm comfortable with it. The writer continues by saying that even when we look at here, at the beginning, I skipped this one, my heart sped up faster than the belt could go, and it gives you an idea of adrenaline, an adrenaline rush. Something exciting is happening. Not a heart attack about to take place, but we can do this. And what I found also interesting is that when they got to the same red lines that we saw in the previous passage, the writer here says, those red lines looked like a pulse. And a pulse speaks of life, of activity, and of action. We want to also pay attention to how it all pulls together. The impression, I also want us to look at what the writer says at the very end. That at the end of all of this, the writer says, it may not have looked like I was going anywhere that night, but I had just broken out of a 10-year slump. This is accomplishment. It speaks of an accomplishment, 10 years. But because of their interaction with this treadmill, this writer felt as if I had done something, he or she would have done something and accomplished something really great. So what would be the attitude of this author to the treadmill? And looking at the examples that we have here, looking at the key elements that we have coming out here, we can conclude that this writer has a more positive view. It's a positive view about the treadmill. There is a tone of, and I want to do it that way, there's a tone of exuberance. So here's an exuberant tone. You can also see coming out of this an enthusiastic tone. You can have also examples, it's excited, the tone is intense, and you're getting all of this coming out from the writer's tone in the second extract. We paid attention to word choice, which is very, very crucial if we look at both of the two extracts. I want you to bear in mind, and when you get your passage, when you're looking at your exam, underline these things as you get them. Look for the words that the writer would be using, because it's very crucial. They're key elements in helping you to identify the tone of the writer. As we wrap up for today, we want to review what our objectives were, and I'm really hoping that you were able to identify those formats, organizational features, and modes of expression of different types of writing and speech. You were able to identify and articulate writer's main point, purpose, organizational strategies, language techniques, and tone, and that we were able to identify and analyze language elements and literary devices from passages that would have been read to you. Next week, or in our next session, we're going to look at data collection methods, primary and secondary sources, reliability and validity of information, and we're going to look at some samples of questions that you're going to get for Module 1 in both the Paper 1 and Paper 2 of your CAPE Communication Studies examination. Once again, I thank you for joining me as we explored Module 1 of our CAPE Communication Studies for the Tobago House of Assembly Division of Education, Innovation and Energies e-Learning Program. Goodbye.